Hello everybody, we're going to be working on Unit 10 tonight, and the topics for Unit 10 are scaffolding, Web API, and Angular.js. Prior to the start of this video here in class, they had an open lab assignment where we worked on section 23. There is a video for it if you need some guided assistance. Part of what you learn in there is scaffolding and a little bit of entity framework. And now we are going to move on to the next with the inclusion of Angular.js's development framework. What this allows us to do, in a nutshell, is to create something that we call a single-page application. So instead of like having multiple pages in a website, we're going to have one page that kind of does it all. And that seems a little weird, but the truth is a lot of applications are written like that. A lot of websites are written like that, and you might not realize it because you think you're changing screens often, but really you're right on the same page. It's just the frameworks, both on the front end and the back end, are kind of doing a bunch of work to get things to happen. So we're going to be working on this exercise here, the Chapter 12 exercise, which is going to be straight from your main textbook that we haven't really used too much for doing this type of thing, but this is where we're working from. The one thing I do want to point out is there are code files that go with this, and I don't want you to go out there and download the completed code because it's already there, right? And just turn that in, because I'll look through it and I'll be looking for clues that you actually created it yourself. But what is handy about that is you can set it off to the side and look at it as you're working and see if you're doing it right. So it's like, is this where it goes or is this where it goes? And I might do the same thing. So if you want to go ahead and follow that link, in fact, I'll take you there, and you see you get an error for going there. But if you browse books, choose ASP.NET, and then find the title of our book somewhere in here. Did I already pass it? Right here. It's grayed out because I've already clicked on it. And if you go there, you'll see there's errata there, but there's also the code for all the chapters. So all the completed exercises. It's not a bad idea to look at the errata just in case we find something that is incorrect, and we should look really at like what pages we're on here in the book. It looks like we're so far up in the page count that there's no real errata for that section. All right, but if you want the code, this is where you get it from. Just kind of a handy thing to know. All right, going back over to our textbook, we're going to be working on an application, a single-page application that they call At the Movies. All right, there's going to be database components involved here. We're going to see a kind of a combination of a lot of the different skills that we've been learning. And there is a step-by-step guide, so don't go into panic mode about it, and I'm going to help guide you through as well. But the devil's in the details, so make sure you read really carefully and try to understand what they're bringing forth. So far we've been working with a straight-up MVC structure. Last week we did a little superficial Web API. We really didn't use a lot of the tools that would go with it. And one of the points of doing this is not only to show you how to do a single web page app, but also to kind of introduce you to this Angular.js technology. This is a technology that's been around for a while. You can see one of the main proponents of it there in that first paragraph about it is Google. So they actually put this framework together to help increase their application development rate, basically. The same reason why they kind of use jQuery so heavily. I'm not sure if they actually invented jQuery or not, or if they were just super huge users of it, and I know that's absolutely the case. And so they basically built this framework to allow you to do a lot of different things client side. So if you think of it from like a company that runs a lot of servers, if you can push a lot of the work to the client, it really takes some burden off of your back end. And not only that, it still has the capability of interacting with the back end, so it's still a robust application building tool. All right, so let's go ahead and fire up Visual Studio if you haven't done so already, and go ahead and choose a new project. We're going to be working, of course, in the C# area. They want us under web, and we're just going to build a regular ASP.NET web application. And we're going to call it At the Movies. Find the spot where you're storing your stuff. I think I've mentioned enough that I've been just putting my stuff out in the cloud for this semester. We want to be in the web category, and then we want ASP.NET web application, not the core application. Interesting side note, we've been having discussions here in the web department about delving into these, the ASP.NET core libraries, because they are developing them very quickly, and the beauty of those libraries is they're cross-platform. So they work on Macs and Linux machines as well as PCs. So that's kind of a thing that we're looking at for the future. Let me get this document off to the second screen here. All right, go ahead and click OK if you got that information typed in. We are going to select Web API. We are going to make sure that our libraries are selected. Are you guys noticing that there's also actually an option here for a single page application? You can just choose it that way. And I'm just taking a little sideline on that really quick, and it says a project template for creating rich client-side JavaScript-driven HTML5 applications using .NET Web API, rich user experience, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And they have just a pre-built template for it. That's not where we're working right now. We're working with these particular tools. We're not worried at all about authentication or anything like that. We know with the selections that we are choosing that we are going to get a bootstrap template. So let's go ahead and just let it build out, and then we're going to run it, and just to get it up in the browser. Whenever you do that process, running it to get it up in the browser, at least that first time, that's called a clean build when you're doing application work, meaning that all the binary files that would compile on the back end get compiled, and then they're all set to go. So let's give it a moment here. Now, if your machines are being quicker than mine today, mine seems to be sluggish, but you can look down at the status bar here as it's running, showing you what exactly it's doing. It looks like it's adding jQuery right now to my project. And it's not just jQuery. You can see all the little libraries that are loading up down here. It is taking its sweet time, though. All right, and now we do have it up and running. I'm going to minimize this output window a bit here. I'm going to go ahead and launch it and just get that up in the browser and running. Let's see if it comes up on screen 1 or screen 2 today. Screen 1 wins. All right, you guys all got it to successfully build? Everybody's good? Okay, good. Mine's being very slow. That first launch is always slow, so be patient. Once again, I just feel compelled to say it is being very slow. And sometimes I wonder if it's all the other stuff I got going on, but I don't have too much running on the machine right now. So it should be faster than this in my mind. And there it is. And it's nothing new, right? This is something that we're used to seeing. All right, now they want us to go ahead and close the page, and we're going to head back over to Visual Studio now, and we are going to add Angular.js as a package to the application. And if you look at the instructions in the book, they're actually asking us on page 359 to do it from the Package Manager console, and we've done that before, right? Where you go to the package manager and you just type in the command. Have you guys ever done that? So what they're asking you to do is run this tool. Now, I'm going to just tell you right now, I'm not going to do it this way. I wanted to use NuGet in its regular form because that's really what you guys are most apt to do. But if you wanted to do it, here's the command that you would type in. And that's in the book. So you just add it to the console, press enter, and it's the equivalent of going to the NuGet package manager. I'm not doing that though, so just to make that clear. I am, however, going to come to the root of the project, call NuGet, and of course we're going to be looking at stuff that's not installed. Right now there's a list of things that are installed. And I don't know if you guys ever take the time to look at this stuff, but there's a whole bunch of stuff that's already added. You noticing that? All right, so we're going to click on Browse up here, and then we're just going to type Angular.js, and we're going to choose the core libraries because that's what they're asking for. Go ahead and click to highlight it. I always am a fan of choosing the latest stable version, whatever they indicate that to be, rather than experimental versions that might not work. In some cases, you even choose older versions just to make sure that things work as intended. So go ahead and click Install. And you can see the output from the console down below. Same thing would have happened if we typed in the command. So it's downloading and then installing items into our scripts folder. So if you click on scripts now and expand it, along with the jQuery and the modernizer and the bootstrap stuff, you now are going to see a collection of Angular files loaded in there. Alright, so now we're going to actually get in there and start to do a little bit of code. So I want to make sure that we read these instructions carefully. So right now I am at the bottom of page 359, and it says the next step is to include the core of Angular script in the application so it arrives in the browser. Alright, so we need to find the index.cs HTML file, so that's going to be in the views folder under home. And keeping in mind that kind of our goal here is a single page application, so this is going to be the page. I mean, this is all there's going to be to it. All right, and if you read what it says in the instructions, it says you can remove all the markup inside the index view and replace the code with the following. So they have a little bit of script here. And yes, I'm going to be brave, select it all, and delete, and then paste in the code from the book. So you can see we have a little combo of some HTML, some weird like curly brackets around some math formula, and then some Razor, which is calling out the Angular files to be pulled in to the page. All right, so now here's the question you might ask. What's with the curly braces? That's Normally not something we see in HTML. What this, however, does have special meaning to the Angular engine, and basically it gives you a place where you can kind of like use it as a template, where you can kind of inject stuff into it, is really kind of the way I think of it. And if you go ahead and run this, which you should at this point, make sure you save it and then run it. What should happen if you run this? I mean, you can make a guess, right? What's 2 plus 3, right? What should it put up on the screen? 11? Yeah, it's going to put 5 up on the screen. And now I'm kind of wishing I hadn't like shut the application down, but since the index page changed, we kind of had to, so we have to let it take its time and all right, and yes, it put 5 up on the screen. And Tom is asking to see my code, so I'm just going to put that up there. Now, as you take a look at that, I want you to see the resulting output in the browser, and that's kind of the important takeaway here. Because obviously we are working with Bootstrap, so the document structure and all the stuff that kind of makes it Bootstrap are still there. But in terms of the actual output to the page, I want you to notice here that this is the part that we injected. All the rest of it is done automatically by Bootstrap and all the other components. Notice how Angular is dropped in at the bottom here. And notice that its placement is after jQuery and Bootstrap. All right. In the browser, that reads just the same way. So really what you usually see when you're using some technologies is something is happening on the back end, and then the code that's pushed to the browser gets changed and it becomes something else, right? That's not the case here. What we're doing with that double set of curly brackets is we're telling it, you know, Angular is going to grab this and it's going to do something. And then on top of that, notice this. That's a little different, right? It doesn't say class or ID or anything like that, does it? It just drops it in. It's kind of like an attribute that's just hanging in midair. All right, so what is happening though is that Angular takes this as a special directive and executes the code inside. And granted, this code is very, very simple. Why don't we try experimenting? They have a little thing that they're doing here. So instead of just dropping 5 onto the page, I got a little snippet of code that they're dropping in. So we're going to go back to Visual Studio. I apologize here. And let's try a little bit of different code. In fact, we can leave that code in place and paste this in. Now, if you guys are not familiar with this style of statement, can anybody tell me what's going on there? What kind of statement is that? It's kind of like an if-else statement, right? The question mark, what comes prior to it, is what we're testing for true or false. What's it set to? It's set to true ahead of time, right? They've already set it to true. Not like there's a statement that we're evaluating. They're just brute force saying true. And if it's true, the output will be true. If it's false, the output will be false. So that's what we call a ternary like decision statement. And you're seeing that format in a lot of languages now. If you guys remember that, you probably have heard me say it many times, I'm sure. All right, so I just saved the index.cshtml file. Can I just refresh it? Sure. So, why didn't that work? Because you can't refresh it? So it's not going to like allow me to put it in there? Well, the kind of the point of it really is more about this little prefix. If you guys remember your HTML5 attributes, they actually added a special thing where you can pump data into applications based upon that. Let's try an experiment though. Let's stop the server from running and then relaunch it and see if that makes a difference. Yeah, and it still does the same thing. What if we remove 1 and relaunch it? Will it then work? So you see that, you guys see what's happening there. What's happening is it doesn't want to allow us multiple sets of code dropped in there in that fashion. If I do just one or just the other, then it works. All right, now we're at the point where we are on the center of page 361, and we're going to actually add the entity framework, which you guys just did, right? This was one of the reasons why I had you do that exercise first. And then we're going to create our data models to create our database. We're going to do a code-first approach to creating the database. So I'm going to go ahead, jump back to Visual Studio. Let's stop the server running. And I'm not really worried about this code at this point, but let's start by adding the entity framework. So on the root of the project, go ahead and add a NuGet package. You can see the entity framework just happens to be right there for me. I'm in the browse mode, of course. And then I'm going to go ahead and click install.
And
I did. So if you have that added in, then it will list like this. You can actually go ahead and close that tab now. All right, so now we're going to go to our models folder, give it a right click, and we're going to add a class file. And looks like we're going to call this one movie. Go ahead and click add. Then you have the basic structure. Inside the class declaration, we are going to add the 4 fields that they show in the book. So I'm going to copy those from my PDF, which is on the second screen here, and just drop them in. And then we'll just review them really quick. So we're going to have an ID field, a title, which is a string, and then ints, which are the release year and the runtime. So obviously all of them have getters and setters. Right, once you have this class declared, you also need to put in the database context, and what you do with that is just basically add this little additional snippet of code in here. And this, of course, is going to ask us to add a library. Anybody know which one I should choose? Maybe the first one? All right, and I'm going to actually pause the video. I want you guys to catch up. So the next thing that we need to do, if you have these two pieces in place, and it's a good idea to save your work. Yikes, that was constant volume. That's a little better. Is they want us to bring up that package manager console because they actually want us to type a command. And I think that's one of the reasons why they had us launch this tool in the first place, honestly, is because they wanted us to be able to type this command at some point. But we do need to issue this command here, which allows us, of course, to take the data models that we build, and when we run a migration, it builds it into the database, right? It adds whatever code we wrote and turns it into tables and data components. But we need to run this command first to make sure that it's able to happen. So you want to run that command. It'll take a moment to go through its process. And then you'll notice, I don't know if you guys caught that or not, but migrations folder jumped into the Solution Explorer as well. All right? And once you do this migrations thing, it does make the assumption that you're writing code to create your database. Right? So it looks at the models and then generates your tables. If you look inside that folder, you're going to see that there is a C# file in there. It's a configuration file that's got a whole bunch of things in there. Well, I guess it's not that much, but it's enough. And that's all done automatically. Part of what we have inside here is a seed method. And the seed method is a method where when we want to add information to our database. So we've created the code to create the table, right? The stuff that goes inside the seed method is data that gets inserted into the database to start with. So sometimes you build the code structure, right? So you build what fields you're going to have, but then you want to put some stuff in there so you have something to look at or something to work with. And so what we do is we drop it into that method called seed. So it's this method here. And if you look at page 362 at the top, they basically want us to remove these comments. And then inside there, we're going to add some movies. And let's see how it pastes in. Well, not the most beautiful of things, but it did paste in. So I'm going to do a little bit of cleanup here as I talk about it. So the first thing that we see is that we establish a context. And notice the add or update method. And then we declare a bunch of new movie objects, each one with a title, a release year, and a runtime. So the runtime is the number of minutes that go with it. Now there's also an ID field, right? But we're going to assume that that ID field maybe will automatically add or be generated. I think that's a pretty safe assumption. Now I'm also noticing that I have an underline. So let's check out the fixes. And notice what they're asking us to do here is they want us to use our at the movies model to attach to. And if you think about that, of course, right? Because that's where a table is. So that's where the information is going to go. So we need to bring that into the mix. So that's going to add a using statement up at the top here that attaches to that particular data object. You can also set up a little component to allow for automatic migrations. So when you add stuff in here in the seed, that this will automatically add that stuff in. So you can add that up here. It's already added, but it's set to false. But we want to actually change ours to true so that it actually does it automatically. Right, now that you got those pieces in place, now we're going to go back to that Package Manager console, and now we're going to push the stuff into the database. So now we're going to say update dash database, like that. Capital U, capital D, and a dash in between. And then go ahead and press enter. And then what that's going to do is it's going to take the stuff that's in the seed, and notice how that migration is automatically created, and it runs the seed method and pushes the data into the database. All right, so now that we have a table built, we've pushed some information into it so we have something to look at. Now we're going to go ahead and do the web API stuff within the application. So to do that, we're going to go to the controllers folder. We're going to right click. We're going to add, guess what, a controller. It's usually what you put in here. So click on that. And then we're going to, since we're working with web API, we are going to select the web API controller with actions using Entity Framework, because that's what we chose to do. We are working with Entity Framework. Go ahead and click Add if you made that selection. And now we're to the scaffold generator, which you guys had a little bit of experience with earlier in the class. We do want to name the controller Movie Controller. You know, and I don't know why I jumped to that box first. You know, it's probably, I don't know, I guess it's a force of habit, but I'm going to go ahead and do it. So I'm going to name it Movie Controller. And then here we need to make a selection that's going to match up with what we're doing. And holy cow, there's a lot more here to choose from than we've normally seen, right? This is not, you know, the simple little interface that we've seen before. And what we need to choose now, aside from the controller name, is the model class. All right, so what do I choose? Oops, I lost that dialog box, sorry. Could it maybe be the one that's just called Movie? At the Movies Models, what do you think? Seems pretty logical to me. We're using the database context. Go ahead and choose Add. All right. When it gets done doing its work here, it does create a movie controller CS file. All right. And it says run the application and navigate to a URL API movies. So let's go ahead and click the play button here. get the server up and running. Give it a second to build out the application. Now all we're going to get as a return value here, as they show in the book in figure 12.9, is you're going to get back either a JSON output or an XML output, and it really depends on how your browser reads the serialized information that's coming back to it. I just wish this thing would launch about 10 times faster. All right, so now we need to append to the URL, API/movies. All right. And I'm getting an error. You guys getting the same thing? Okay, so we're going to just take a quick pause here and figure out why that happened. Of course, I get the voice from online here, so I'm going to give credit to James. So I'm recording this into the video, James. He said that we name the action movie, not movies, so no wonder it won't respond to movies. So let's try movie. If that's the case, well, thank you very much, James. It's a good catch. It's always something simple like that. So now you see that we are able to pull back in the form of an XML document the information that's in the database. So how it comes back to the browser, frankly, is actually dependent upon how it's interacting with your database server. So the back-end engine of this turns it into an XML file in this format. And really, the rendered view of it is just to show you the structure that you have, and then all the information that we typed in. So hopefully you guys were successful with that and got that to work. Everybody did? Excellent. Now we're going to go ahead and leverage some of the Angular features to help it basically work and look a little bit better. So the first thing that we're going to do is let's go ahead and close the browser window, stop the server running, and go back to Visual Studio. We're going to start by creating a new folder in the project, and they're asking us to call it client. So I'm going to go to the root of the project, right click, add a new folder, and there I am naming it client. They're indicating here in the instructions, it doesn't really matter what you call it, but this is what they're suggesting, so let's just go with it. Okay, it says inside the client folder, create a subfolder named scripts. So go ahead and do that. And one of the reasons they're doing this basically is just to make things a little bit more organized. Inside that folder, create a new file. And we're going to create a JavaScript file. Did you guys see how I did that? I'm going to backtrack if I'm going too fast. So just right click that folder, add, and then JavaScript was just on the short list here, so I just went ahead and clicked it. And they want us to call it at the movies.js in camel case, so lowercase a, capital T, capital M. And then they would like us to add the code from step number 2 on page 365. So we're just going to drop that right in. Now, one thing you guys are going to notice about this, there's kind of like two weird code kind of things going on here. The one is that we have an unnamed function, right? And also notice that that unnamed function sits inside of a set of parentheses that they themselves are unnamed. So what's going to happen with this code? Will this code just execute when we hit this file? Yes, that's what's going to happen. It's just going to trigger and run. There's a little bit of a variable that we're throwing in here, and we're basically just naming it and basically setting up an array function that just basically gives us the capability of inserting more Angular code. We're also going to go back to that index view now. So we're going to go back to the views, home, index file, which I still have open up on the screen. And we want to actually add a reference to that script inside of that top section of the document. So I'm pasting this over from my PDF, and it should work just fine as long as I named everything exactly the same. If it starts to underline on you, it's maybe like you have a character off like I did before. And then down here, they would like us to basically clear out the junk and then get rid of the data piece, oops, and add to it an actual attribute at this point called @the_movies. Once again, capital T, capital M. Do a Control S and save it. All right, and really, all we're doing here, we're setting up a div that's got a special attribute to it that really is only recognized by Angular. And what that allows us to do is basically inject content into this area. Now, I actually have a line feed in between, but the truth is we don't even need that. I mean, you could just do it like this. You know, it's just a placeholder. In fact, I'm going to do it like that on purpose. All right, next thing that we need to do is we actually need to create a controller that's going to allow us to get that list of movies and put it up on the screen. All right. So it says, first create a new script file in the client script folder named ListControllerJS. So let's do that. Let's go up to the client folder, right click, add JavaScript file. We're going to call this ListController.js. And then inside that file, we're going to drop in this function. And I'm going to build it in the steps that they're showing it. So this is what they first show in the book, that this just drops in. And the way that they're describing it in the book, they're calling it an immediately invoked function. And remember, the reason that immediately invokes is because it's inside those parentheses. It just runs, and it's not named, it just executes. Now, we do want to also drop in I see what they're doing. They're actually showing a combination. So what they're doing here is, you know, the function is empty, but you notice that the Angular.module at the movies is outside the curly brackets. What they're trying to show us is, and I'll just bring the book over to show you this, is that you can also write that code like this, where you take that variable declaration and drop it into the code body as an option. They're not necessarily telling us to do it that way. And they say the choice between the two is very subjective. Pick the style you like best. I'm just going to go with what I have sitting here, because that's what I pasted in already, so why do it twice? status, you guys. Are you guys good? All right, so now we need to make sure that this recognizes our controller. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually add a variable inside here, which once again is going to trigger what they called an immediately invoked function, if you want to use their terminology. So what they did is they dropped in a variable, which is a list controller, which is another anonymous function, and that also has a parameter basically that we're passing to it in this format. So be really careful about how you paste this in. And notice how the app controller lists the controller by name here, both as a string and as an object. All right, go ahead and do a Control S and save that. And now, as you might guess, we have to go back to that index file, and we also have to add a link to that script as well. So anytime you're adding something here and you want it to be able to invoke automatically, you got to drop in a link to it. So add that in and make sure you save. Now inside the div that we were working with, we're going to start adding some stuff. In fact, what we're going to do is we're going to add a controller. So inside here, I'm going to drop in this declaration, and yes, I'm throwing in a closing div tag to go with it. So now we have something that looks like this. And you can lay this out any way you want. It's pretty much irrelevant. I guess I'm going to do it like this because the book is doing it like this. All right, so what this allows it to do then, with the directive using ng-controller, it will attach to the controller within the application. And then it actually kind of helps you kind of create it, if you will. Now, we do need a place to kind of put in to inject some code. So you see how I did 2 sets of curly brackets there, and the moment I got that second set in, it switched to like bold, so it like knows it's like a Angular thing. So, and then inside there, we're just going to type message. Now we're going to go back to, do a Control S to save, go back to the list controller JavaScript, and then inside the list controller function, we are going to use some special syntax here to populate that message field with whatever text we want. And I'm going to say hello, whatever. You guys can say hello world if you want. And don't forget a semicolon at the end to terminate the statement since we're in JavaScript. Now we should be able to launch this and help it actually push that out to the browser. So go ahead and try that and make sure it works. Of course, now it's coming up on screen number 2. So that wasn't very successful, so I'm going into, okay, so it looks like it transported it just fine, so now I got to do a little bit of troubleshooting, so I'm pausing the video for a sec. Found it already. All right, so what I am missing here is I'm not passing the scope in, so I do need to do this. You guys are missing the same thing, I assume? All right, so let's save that and try it one more time. Let's launch the server. Okay, so I'm getting somebody saying it worked already. Just kind of a habit I have. So, all right, screen number 2 again, here it comes. And we have success. So we did finally get that message up onto the screen. So we successfully were able to basically trigger those scripts and get them to push the text back into the window. Now, for as silly as all this seems, they make a point at the top of page 368 of saying that you've really accomplished 3 key tasks. And why don't I just bring that over to the screen here so we can just read it together. All right, so it demonstrates 3 key abstractions. Controllers are responsible for putting together a model by augmenting the scope variable, and they avoid manipulating the DOM directly. Instead, changes in the interface are propagated by updating information in the model that the view consumes. So now, if you think about what that means, right, that's a lot of fancy words, but what it means is that by changing information in the database, what we see on the screen will also change. That's pretty profound if you stop and really analyze it. The model object is unaware of the view in the controller. The model is only responsible for holding the state as well as exposing some behavior to manipulate the state. So the model is really separated in essence from what we're seeing. The view uses templates and directives to gain access to the model and present information. The separations of concerns, remember that's kind of one of those key guiding principles of MVC, is breaking things into little pieces, is closer to the model view model as we see in XAML-based application than it is to true MVC design pattern. So this isn't really true MVC. But notice it has its own acronym: model, view, view, model. Like you stuttered a couple times, and then it's kind of like an anagram or something. All right, let's move on to the next section here. And next section talks about services. And they go through a little bit of an explanation saying that services are objects that perform specific tasks inside this environment. And they give examples, so like communicating over HTTP, managing browser history, localization, DOM compilation, and a whole lot more, according to this. It says one service that comes with Angular out of the box is the $HTTP service, which exposes methods to make asynchronous HTTP requests. So the list controller needs to use that to communicate with the web API endpoints on the server. So we need to actually add an HTTP piece to the mix here. So one of the parameters that we're going to pass in, aside from just scope, is this additional thing called HTTP. So we're going to add that to the list controller. Go ahead and save your work. Notice I didn't stop my server this time. You guys seeing that? Because I get kind of impatient, waiting for it to build all the back-end stuff again. And it should be just fine because JavaScript and HTML really aren't going to affect any of the back-end stuff at all. All right. Next thing that we need to do is we need to adjust this line here. And I'm noticing that on page 369 they're also actually removing this message here. So I may as well just go ahead and do that. And then on this line, they're not removing that line, but they're adding a line above it where they're actually using the list controller to inject some information. And this is actually a direct demonstration of that concept of dependency injection. This is kind of it in the flesh here. Next thing that we're going to do is inside the function, the ListController function itself, is we're going to add some code. And I'm just going to grab this directly. Now I'm also noticing as I grab this that now they removed the statement we just added, where I think basically what they're doing is they're replacing one with the other is what's going on. So if you notice that this approach here with inject, that being removed, now they're using an HTTP GET based upon the URL that we're pumping in. And from there, we really are leveraging jQuery pretty heavily here to help us with some of it. So it's a function inside of a function inside of a function, folks. Now, really, what part of this is doing is it's leveraging this thing called a promise object. And I don't know if you guys remember from your Web 2 class. Did you guys remember that concept at all? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe you just did the homework and then just moved on and never thought about it again. But basically, like taking an object state and deferring it for use later. So we leave it as it is, intending to pump data into it or whatever it is, and then do it at a later point in time. Now, in order to get this stuff to all kind of play nice together, there's an additional little piece we have to contend with, and that is we have to go back to our index file now, and we have to add some code that will allow us to inject into the format that we have. So go ahead and save your JavaScript file, jump back over to the index file, and then here in the middle where we have our message, now we're going to actually do message, or excuse me, movies, message, movies dot length. And if you just take a look at this just for a moment, notice kind of what we're doing here. We're not, you know, in fact, what might not be a bad idea is let's actually go back to the application for just a moment and do a refresh and see if it'll load up with the change. All right, it didn't like that too much. And I think James is about to text me, right, James? Do I need to do this? Because I screwed it up before? Nope, that didn't fix it either. But I have this feeling that not only do we need to do that, but we need to do a couple of other tweaks here. So bear with me. I'm going to actually stop the server and restart it again. And let's see if that changes the behavior. Here comes the browser. And really what we're trying to do with this silly code, movies.length should be equivalent to the number of movies we have listed in the database. So that should be 3, right? That's at least what the book says that we put in there. I do have some concern here though. Actually that, you know, yeah, see, it is singular, so it will probably throw an error. I'm not sure how I made that mistake at some point when I typed it in. And it's still coming up wrong. All right, let's go ahead and close that. And you see this spot right here? You guys might anticipate that maybe I need to do that. What do you think? Good guess? That's why it's good when you're following these things. Make sure that you're spot on with everything. Yeah, and I did use the singular. And let's just go ahead and change this as well. And then hopefully that will get it to work. Keep wishing that every time I relaunch this that it would launch a little faster, and I'm not really getting that effect. So the back-end components of this are pretty intense. Of course, we do have several different libraries of JavaScript that we're loading in here, so it's got to read in all those lines of JavaScript each time, which are pretty huge. So not only do we have Bootstrap, and then you start to understand like why, when we're doing the other tutorials, why they don't do them with Bootstrap, because it saves all the time loading that stuff up. Yeah, and it's still failing for me. All right, let's see if we can kind of backtrack here and figure out why it is failing. So now I have my suspicion that I should have left this alone. Right, I didn't try that approach, did I? Let's see if I can just do a refresh here and have it. Nope. All right, so we're in troubleshooting mode now. And it's always the little things. You always got to pay attention. Looking in the document here, trying to find my mistake, and notice how they appended data and why. Because now we're bringing numeric values back. So I'm going to add data to this spot here in the attribute. Let's do a save. Let's see if we can just refresh it in the browser without reloading and get it to say magic number of 3. All right, so then I'm going to stop and start it. And I'm still getting the same problem. And unfortunately, we're at the point now where we have to stop too, because we're at the end of class. So our challenge for next week when we come back is to figure out what's going on with this. The due date on this is pretty far out yet. So we have plenty of time to work on it, so we can come back next week, troubleshoot it, start over if we have to, and then we're going to work on that other web API tutorial as well. So this video ends here, and I'll see you guys next time.